Situationships, friends with benefits, casual dating, often the relationships of choice for an avoidant, especially if you're dealing with a dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant that leans heavily dismissive. For fearful avoidants that lean anxious, this generally does not apply. So why do they prefer this non-commitment type of relationship? Well, it soothes their fears, but still gives them some surface level connection. It doesn't trigger their attachment wounds. They get that dopamine. And the dopamine rush that they get from the situationship or friends with benefits is what they crave. This is a person that really doesn't form oxytocin bonding. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone that goes off in the brain, especially early in dating. But due to their attachment wounds, their fears, their walls, their brain does not really form the oxytocin in the way that a secure person does, or even an anxious person does. They don't have the ability to bond to their partner in the same way that somebody else does. And that's because of their insecurities. See, the avoidant actually associates commitment with abandonment. Now, that doesn't make logical sense, but when you go back to this person's childhood, it does actually make sense. This is a person that received consistent childhood emotional neglect. They were not given the love and nurturing in the way that they needed, growing up in households where you don't talk about feelings. And their own feelings were rejected and dismissed as children. They weren't able to express themselves. The problem is they personalize this neglect, growing up to feel defective, unlovable, like there's something wrong with them. That's a personalization of the way that they were treated. They carry this forward to being an adult. They learned in childhood that if you rely on anybody for your emotional needs, you're likely to get rejected, disappointed, abandoned. They couldn't rely on their parents or caretakers. Their feelings were not nurtured. So they create these walls and they keep their partner on the other side of the wall because their subconscious fear is if I let down my wall, this person's going to figure out that I'm defective and unlovable and they're going to reject and abandon me. So how do they tie that in with commitment? Well, when you commit to somebody, it is implied that you need to be vulnerable with them, that you have to be emotionally available to them, that you have to give something of yourself to them, that those walls have to come down if you're committed. So since they associate emotional intimacy with rejection and abandonment, emotional intimacy is implied with commitment, so they therefore associate commitment with rejection and abandonment. It gives them enormous anxiety. You may notice that in your situationship or even friends with benefits situation with your dismissive avoidant partner or ex, that every time you talked about a commitment label, they would get a lot of anxiety. They get stressed, shut down, overwhelmed, and tell you things like, why do we have to put a label on it? Well, not putting a label on it gives them the permission to keep their walls up. They don't have to be vulnerable with you because they're not committed to you. They get to get the validation from you, that dopamine rush that they crave, but they don't have to open up and they can keep their walls up, which means they can keep emotional distance and keep themselves safe as they perceive it to be in a maladaptive way. But if they lower their walls, commit to you, put that title on it, well, that means they have to be vulnerable, which means you're going to figure out that they're not good enough and you're going to reject and abandon them. It's not that they actually are not good enough. It's that they perceive themselves to be not good enough. So that's why they often prefer these casual dating situations, friends with benefits, situationships. They crave dopamine and they also get to keep their walls up, but they do long for connection and love at some level. So these very casual flings give them some sort of connection that they crave. It satisfies some sort of need for it. Not a deep need, but they are getting that attention. They're getting that validation, that external validation that they crave, and they're getting the dopamine rush that comes along with it. And dopamine is that feel-good chemical that goes off in the brain whenever you're doing something fun, enjoyable, and that includes a romantic relationship when you're getting that kind of attention, whether it is emotional or physical attention. But that's why they can often spend a couple days with their situationship partner, go all in, act like they are a couple, but then they're gone for 4 or 5 days, creating their space, keeping emotional distance, putting no titles on it. And they're not really considering the impact that this has on the other person, because the other person is being strung along, constantly hoping that this will develop into a full-fledged committed relationship. But the avoidant, well, they're only thinking of themselves and whatever it is that they perceive they want, need, feel, or fear in the moment. They're not considering the needs and the feelings of the other person. A dismissive avoidant that is not working on themselves, that is not self-aware, doesn't really have the capacity to consider the feelings and the needs of their partner. It's all about them because of their attachment wounds and their insecurities. They had to learn it as a child that the only person that would look out for them is themselves. So they become programmed by repetition of this behavior throughout their life to look out for themselves because they learn nobody else will. And it can result in very selfish behavior that lacks empathy and does not consider the feelings of the other person. If you're in a situationship or a friends with benefits situation and you want a real committed relationship, that's the time to hold a boundary. Your boundaries are your limits of what you want, what you don't want, what you need, what you don't need, what your expectations are. Because your needs and feelings do matter. They absolutely do, and don't sell yourself short. And you can simply say, what I'm looking for is a committed relationship, a situationship with no commitment and no progression of the relationship is not something that works for me. And if a committed relationship is not something you're looking for, then this situationship, this relationship is something that doesn't work for me. And hold that boundary. Yes, you might lose the person, but if they're not willing to commit to you, if they're not willing to advance the relationship and they're not willing to meet your needs, you never really had that person. And now, instead of being tied up in a situationship with an unavailable partner, you'll be free to meet a person that will invest the emotional energy into you, that will consider your needs, that does want to show up for you, respect your boundaries, and actually be emotionally available for you. Don't sell yourself short. Don't allow yourself to get strung along and tied up with a partner where it's really a one-way street situationship. You deserve better. Don't sell yourself short.